begin the presentation, just to say that I would like to welcome this Nairobi workshop on water, congratulate the organizer, and thank all participants. Less than a year after the historic 9th World Water Forum that Senegal hosted on behalf of all Africa in Dakar, March 2022, and a few weeks before the major United Nations Water Conference, March 2023, this workshop, which opens today, is certainly of particular relevance. Water is a vital issue everywhere, but in Africa, the issue of water is of critical importance. Water is life, it is development, water is peace, it is also resilience, but above all, water is a human right. There is no health without access to adequate water and sanitation, but there is also no sustainable socioeconomic progress without access to adequate water resources. And it should be emphasized also that water security is a pillar and a decisive factor for the success of the agenda of the SDGs. Nevertheless, it must be recognized that if current trends continue, very few states in Africa will achieve universal access to water and sanitation in 2030. Next slide. Overall, Africa has the lowest rates of access to drinking water and sanitation compared to other continents. 40% of Africans do not have access to adequate water services, and 70% of the population in Africa do not have adequate sanitation services. There are also inequalities in these access rates, whether by country, by region, but also by area. In particular, urban areas are better provided than rural areas. Ladies and gentlemen, although water is in large quantities in the world, it should be emphasized that fresh water are limited and subject to increasing pressures and degradations. Africa, after Australia, is the second driest continent in the world. With 18% of the world population, Africa has only 9% of the world's freshwater reserves. Next slide. Freshwater resources are very unevenly distributed in Africa. The 6 most water-rich countries have 54% of the resources. And in terms of renewable fresh water, Egypt has only 25 cubic meters per person, while Gabon has 121,000 cubic meters per person. And we can say also that the population under water stress in Africa was already 47% in 2000. It will be 65% in 2025 and could reach 74 in 2040. Among all the factors that heavily increase the pressure on freshwater resources and create complex problems of drinking water supply, there is the rapid population growth and also the rapid urbanization in Africa. Already in 2025, with 750 million, the urban population of Africa will exceed the total population of Europe. So let's say that Africa remains the continent with the highest population growth rate and also the youngest continent by population. The other critical factor aggravating the pressure on freshwater resources is climate change. Climate change, I think that it is the next slide. Climate change remains a very, very important aggravating factor on the pressure on fresh water in Africa. Water, we know all, remains the main marker of climate change. And moreover, 90% of extreme climatic events are linked to water, droughts, floods, etc. More than anywhere else in the world, climate change is now causing a water crisis in Africa with dramatic consequences in terms of human security, but also economic and environmental impacts. Another important issue in the water sector in Africa is related to the number of rivers, lakes, and aquifers that are shared between several countries. Indeed, 90% of surface water in Africa is shared through 63 transboundary river basins. And we can say that more than 33% of the African population depends on this shared water. There is, therefore, a strong need to develop cooperation and collaboration to ensure concerted, equitable, and united management of these shared waters. However, only 29 of surface waters and 10% of transboundary aquifers are subject to solid institutional agreements to manage and develop common resources within the formal framework of a shared vision and mutual interest. Next slide. We all know that Africa suffers from critical underdevelopment of its water resources. Next slide, yes. Africa suffers from critical underdevelopment of its water resources due mainly to lack of investment and financing. Of the 5 billion cubic meters of fresh water available in Africa, only 4% are developed for irrigation, food, and hydroelectricity. It is so clear that we need increased public and private investment to ensure water security in Africa. Next slide. In 2015, the World Bank estimated that $40 billion per year should be devoted to investment to enable Africa to achieve SDG 6, which aims in particular for universal access to water and sanitation. In fact, currently, the reality shows that only $13 billion go to this investment. If we add the cost of operation, maintenance, and adaptation to climate change, this makes it possible to assess the huge importance of the financial gap to be filled. To achieve the SDG 6, it will be necessary to multiply by 12 the current rate of progress for drinking water and by 20 for sanitation. Next slide. It is to tackle this investment deficit that the African Union has adopted in 2021 the African Investment Program, which aims to mobilize $30 billion per year by 2030. Next slide. The Ninth World Water Forum, hosted by Senegal in March 2022, adopted a Blue Deal on water security for peace and development. This Blue Deal should contribute to the success of the global water agenda expected from the next UN conference. The Dakar Blue Deal promotes an ambitious, transformative, and effective global water agenda, which could accelerate progress on water security, fill investment gaps, and achieve the SDGs by 2030. Finally, this Blue Deal has 5 axes. The first one is to guarantee the right to water and sanitation for all and everywhere. The second axis deals with how to guarantee resource availability and resilience. The third axis ensure adequate funding. Fourth axis, how to ensure inclusive water governance with social and technical innovation, capacity buildings, and nexus. And finally, 5 axis, strengthen cooperation and hydrodiplomacy. I hope that all together we will promote and implement this Blue Deal for a better future of Africa in our continent and for all the humanity. Thank you for your kind attention.